Hello, and welcome to episode 17 of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Before we get stuck into this week's episode, the First Responder Mental Wellness Method is available to join. The program is amazing, and I am so excited to welcome in new members. Please head over to my website, tacticalyogaaustralia.com, for all the details. And I've also recorded a whole episode dedicated to the program, so go and take a listen to episode 4 for more information on that. This week's guest is so special. Her name is Sarah O'Brien, and I am absolutely obsessed with her passion and tenacity. I first became aware of Sarah when I was listening to her husband Matt's podcast, The Heart to Heart Walk. She was having a conversation by the campfire with Janine Hopkin. They were discussing their journey as families living alongside PTSD. I hadn't yet created this podcast, but I knew that the moment I did, Sarah had to be on it. I met Sarah in person at the Frontline Mental Health Conference in March this year after listening to her speak live. I was in tears then, and I was in tears when we recorded this episode, and I've told her that I can't listen to her anymore because I just cry. And I think the reason for the tears is that I can deeply resonate with her family's story and how their story is just one of millions across the world. I believe it's so important to share this episode with you because the families living alongside PTSD need a voice too. They need support. They are literally the ones keeping it together, keeping their partners alive. They need to be seen and heard. I want to add a content warning. This episode is packed full of emotion and may be intense for some. Now for her official bio. Sarah is a community disaster resilience and recovery practitioner and is passionate about social justice, equity, and community-led practice. She is the mother of 2 teenage girls who are equally passionate and driven about their interests. This has resulted in Sarah also being a soccer and dance mum. She's the wife of Matt, an ex-New South Wales Police Sergeant and Fire and Rescue New South Wales firefighter who was medically retired in 2022 after being diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety, and is now the Hot Debrief podcaster, documentary and content creator with Soaring Eagle Productions. Having supported her husband to navigate the impacts of PTSD and then navigate the adversarial workers' compensation system, which has brought its own trauma, Sarah saw firsthand the impacts on not only the individual but also their family and wider network of friends and colleagues. This experience has driven Sarah's passion to not only raise awareness of the mental health of first responders and their families, but also call for action to provide world's best practice and trauma-informed care programs to support those currently serving as well as first responder veterans. This has now led her to, with a friend who shares her living experience, create a charity, Living Alongside. Through this organisation, Sarah hopes to advocate for those behind our first responders, their families and friends, and raise awareness of the impacts of first responder service and the psychological workplace injuries this can cause has on the loved ones of our first responders. Living Alongside will also provide a range of support, practical assistance, and education for those living alongside a loved one with a psychological injury. All of Sarah's links will be in the show notes, and with that, let's get into it. Welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma, the podcast that explores journeys of resilience and hope. I'm Rosie Skeen, a yoga and breathwork teacher and founder of Tactical Yoga Australia. As a former soldier's wife, mum to 3 beautiful kids and a medically retired New South Wales police officer with PTSD, I understand the challenges of navigating mental health in the first responder and veteran community. Join us for incredible stories from individuals who've confronted the depths of mental illness and discovered their path to happiness and purpose, as well as solo episodes and expert discussions. Together, we'll uncover the tools to help you navigate your journey toward a brighter, more fulfilling life. Whether you're looking for helpful insights, practical tips, or just a friendly reminder that you're not alone, Triumph Beyond Trauma has got your back. You matter, and your journey to a happier, more meaningful life starts right here. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm so excited to have you here, Sarah. We just were speaking off air, but you are the first person I've had who is the partner of someone with PTSD and a service member, being New South Wales Police Force and Fire Brigade. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, Matt was a retained New South Wales firefighter as well, yeah.
So I'd like to we'll just get a little bit of a background with you and Matt. When did you first meet and how was your relationship in those early days?
Yeah, look, we met when we were 23 and we met at a mutual friend's send-off party. Matt was in the police in the Blue Mountains. and I was in education in Newcastle. Didn't know each other. We just had a mutual friend, and we met at a pub at her farewell. And yeah, it was pretty. I don't believe in love in first sight, but I went home the night after and said to my mum, "I've met the guy I'm going to marry." And my mum did the whole Sarah, now don't get carried away. And I'm like, I'm not. I just know this is my person. And yeah, he struck me straight away with his integrity. He is an incredibly honest and good person. I used to joke around and say he's the goodest person I know. No, goodest isn't a word, but it was really, he is just such a true and loyal friend. His nickname is Dog because his friends always say that, yeah, he's a man's best friend. And I think that really is at the core of who he is. And that was very much the bond that we made very, very quickly. Yeah.
That's so beautiful to
Yeah.
hear someone talk about their partner like that.
No, no, like I see so much of him in those things that I first, I suppose you say attraction, but they were really just his sense of moral decency really was something that really struck me. I hadn't met anyone with such a true sense of justice, and that just was in everything in his friendships. When you're with him, he's so present with you. He's really focused on you and your experience and your story. And he thinks deeply and cares deeply about the people in his life. And I see so much of those early traits that I really admired and respected. I see them now in our children, and which is really beautiful. They are very much a reflection of their father. They've got a very strong sense of social justice, and they are incredibly loyal, deep friends. It's really lovely to see.
That's something beautiful to pass on to your children.
Yeah, yeah. They see some challenging aspects of that dynamic now. So it's nice to see that the core foundations of a true good person are very much there, and they do get them from their father.
So maybe if we can fast forward a little bit, and we'll talk about Matt's diagnosis, but more importantly, I want to talk about you. So what did you notice some things weren't quite right with Matt?
I had over time. Matt, as I said, we met when we were 23. Matt had been in the police for 3 years. He was at a police station in the Blue Mountains. Lawson was then a small little one-manner with 6 people, and they just did afternoon shifts and day shifts on their own, and then evening shifts was 2-man. And that was my introduction to the police force and the police world, and they were a really tight-knit group. Matt was the only young single bloke in the station. They were all older men with wives. The wives really took me under their wing of, this is the police wife way. And I went, I'm not cooking him dinner on a night shift. He doesn't make me breakfast when I leave early in the morning. So I was probably a little bit more of a feminist and a bit stronger in that sense. And I think some of the women went, oh no, you make a meal. And I was like, oh, got 2 legs and a heartbeat. I think he can cook his own. And so we had some of those sorts of banter. It was really, but they were a beautiful group of people and really welcomed me in. But very quickly, Matt wanted to join rescue. That's why he went to the mountains. That was in his calling. And he joined rescue within 12 months of us, dating and moving in together. And he was absolutely just loved rescue. He admired all of the senior rescue guys that were in the unit and the legacy that they'd left. And he worked so hard. He maintained his fitness. He would ride his bike and run to work. Our weekends were canyoning and abseiling and doing hikes so that he knew the trails. He knew that world. He knew the rocks and trees that might have been a point of reference for someone that was lost because they looked significant, so he could know where they thought they were standing so he could find them quickly. He really did live and breathe rescue, and I now know that was probably, at the time, everyone thought it was really healthy because we were outdoors and he was physically active and he was doing all of those things, and he does love that mountain landscape and the wilderness. But I now know that he was too invested and too much of his world was wrapped around that. Therefore, now we can't go to the Blue Mountains as a family because Matt can't be there because so much of his trauma is interwoven with experiences that were for us. So we would go on a 7K afternoon run together most afternoons, and they were beautiful, but we can't even remember that experience now because they're interwoven with such heartbreak as well and such negative experiences. So I wish now I'd known those things to have a broader range of interests. And even his photography interest was wildlife and landscapes and those sorts of things of the mountains. So he kind of seemed to pull all of his hobbies and interests back into a really, really interdependent experience. And yeah, I wish I'd known then what I know now about actually having a broader range of experiences and interests that don't necessarily connect to each other. Yeah, but yeah, so we were in the mountains for years. Matt progressed. He was as I said, he loved rescue, and he fought really hard to stay in that unit in terms of increasing his skill set. So, he had a number of really, really close calls, which he's spoken about in a number of other podcasts, which instilled in us that actually the skill sets that he had needed to expand, and the training that the rescue unit offered actually needed to expand to be fit for purpose for the environment. So swiftwater rescue was something Matt pursued. Rock climbing rescue was something Matt pursued, and we paid for him to go down to the Grampians and do a course with the Defence Force because of a near-miss experience that he'd had. And then luckily, a couple of years later, it was our rock climbing equipment up, because it wasn't police issue at the time, but it was our rock climbing equipment that he used in a job that meant a successful outcome. We paid for him to go to the Barringtons and do a swiftwater rescue course before that was a standard set of training that was offered, because he'd nearly drowned in a waterfall. So, he was always looking for, how do we provide the best possible care to community, but how do we also skill ourselves with world best practice? So he was always trying to bring in new pieces of equipment that weren't necessarily part of the rescue suite, because he could see the benefit. So he was always pushing, I suppose, in that sense, from the place of, how do we provide best practice? And that's always been part of, I think, who he is how do we improve? How do we make systems better? And I suppose I can see so much of that now in his advocacy in terms of mental health for first responders and workers' compensation systems. So it's probably it's a value that hasn't left him. He's just using it in a different way, and sees his community slightly differently. I suppose he was originally in the force and the police force and fire rescue. It was about the broader community that he served in terms of that skill set that he had, and the people of New South Wales and his colleagues. And now I suppose he sees his community as first responders that have had a mental health impact from their work, and those that are now unfortunately part of the workers' compensation system as well.
Yeah, hearing that story about him pushing to get better equipment does not surprise me at all. I have not met Matt, but I have listened to his podcast, and I've seen a lot of his posts, and I know that he pushes real hard and likes to push back. But I can imagine that would have been incredibly frustrating for him at the time.
Absolutely, it was. He could not fathom that some of the skills and techniques that were still being delivered as core training were actually so superseded and not even endorsed in other areas. He was constantly frustrated by that. But even the EPIRB program that's now around, where you go to the police station and you can get an EPIRB if you're doing a bushwalk, so that if you get injured or lost, you can activate it, and they know exactly where you are. Yeah, that was a piece of work that many, including Matt, fought for, because of the really, really challenging and sometimes really negative outcomes from lost people. And that was a lot of work from many voices really pushing for that. And now it's just something that's accepted as a standard piece of offering, and you can see the benefit in being able to locate people very, very quickly. It doesn't require as much of the workforce. People don't have to have really negative experiences. They get the help and the care far more immediately than that they need. So, yeah, and it's not, where in the valley are these people? We actually know that we've got a really tight location that we can search for, and that we know that we'll get them. So there's lots of those sorts of things that have happened, and that's just natural evolution in every field. We learn from our experiences, we improve our practice, but Matt was very much a person that drove that.
Yeah, it's important to look back, and especially for Matt too, to go, I was a part of that, and it wasn't all for nothing.
Absolutely.
Because that frustration, I couldn't even imagine.
No, and I think sometimes when you leave and you look back now, and he can see and look at the rescue units now, and the skills and the training and the equipment that they have, you can may not have happened in his time there, but you can certainly see that approach of advocacy and aiming for best practice and really pushing the boundaries of what should we be doing? Where should we be placing our finances and our energies in training and resourcing? He can see that coming to fruition for others that are in that force now and in that service.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so good. So in relation to Matt and the time that he was leaving the police, was it something that you've picked up on when Matt sort of, started to display symptoms of PTSD, or was it something a little bit quieter, or how did that come about in your family?
Yeah, really a combination. So Matt was in the police force for 18 years, and towards the end of that, I really felt that he had done enough. I could see in him probably what I saw more as fatigue, compassion fatigue, burnout. And also we'd moved from the Blue Mountains to the Hunter Valley, and Matt could not get a transfer into the Hunter Valley. And we tried and tried and tried, and he could not get that transfer. And the reason why we moved was because I had two little children, or we had two little girls. I was at home with them on my own as he was at work, and I needed a bigger support network for my children. One of them was diagnosed with an eating disorder at 9 months, so didn't eat solid food for till she was nearly 2. So that in itself had a lot of challenges in terms of keeping her well and healthy and keeping me on top of the fatigue that came just in those, parenting moments. So I wanted to come home a bit closer to home to have my support network of my family, because Matt's mum lives in Adelaide and his dad's on the Central Coast. So we didn't have any immediate family at all in the Blue Mountains. And we really also wanted our children to have a relationship with their grandparents as well. So we made that choice to move. But when Matt couldn't move, couldn't get transferred, that was really, really challenging. And then I could see the fatigue. I felt, I think you need a break. And he didn't see it at all, really pushed against it. And I think he and possibly some members of his family were pretty annoyed with me for pushing so hard in terms of getting him to leave. But I, again, in my naivety at the time, I thought leaving was enough. He just needed something else, something different, and didn't need to be in that environment anymore. And I thought that would be enough for him to, be okay. And at the time it was. So he left the police. He remained in Fire Rescue New South Wales. He joined as a retained firefighter when we moved to Mount Victoria, because the Mount Vic fireys there were also rescue responders, and often for many of the jobs in the higher Blue Mountains area, they would turn up before the police had the opportunity to get to from Katoomba. So, the captain knocked on our door as we were unpacking into the house and said, "Matt, we want your skills in the fire station. Will you join?" So Matt got permission for secondary employment and to join Fire Rescue New South Wales as a retained firefighter. And that was a beautiful station. We loved the Mount Vic station. They became, very much a family. And we're still, got a lot of connections with many of them today, which we're really grateful for. But yeah, so Matt remained in the Fire Rescue New South Wales when we moved to the Hunter Valley, and he left the police force, and he got a job as a mine safety regulator with then, I think, Trade and Investment, the government department. It's all the Waratah, as my children keep reminding us, but the name changes every election. So yeah, so then it was, I think, Trade and Investment. So he was a mine safety regulator and based in Maitland. And he enjoyed that work. It was a new position, and he really enjoyed the challenges of what that role involved. And he was doing really, really well, and remained in fire rescue, as I said. And that choice to remain in fire rescue very much was of the basis that there really wasn't anyone else in the community that had had his extensive rescue experience and training. And therefore he said, well, the government really trained me up with these skills and this knowledge. I owe it now to the community to continue to allow those skills and that knowledge and experience to be available to them when they need it. So he really was that, very much that sense of service, that he remained in fire rescue to support the community and support the other officers in that station with the skill set and the knowledge that he had to impart and share to serve and protect. So he continued to do that. And then there were a number of incidences in that fire station that really were shocking, and more around management and personality. And we remained very much outside of that. We didn't want to be involved in it at all, and we had completely kept ourselves separate. But there was a forced mediation upon the station, and we had said mediation will not work. It's actually probably dangerous at this point. But that was really not listened to. And so the mediation happened, and the mediation absolutely imploded and became a horrific experience of like, yeah, people standing over each other, screaming, swearing. It was not at all a mediation that should have been conducted. And it was, yeah, and at that time, the perpetrator of the reason why the mediation was being held turned on Matt for reasons we still to this day do not understand. And subsequently, he threatened Matt, bailed him up out the back of our local little country town's shopping centre and simulated a pistol at Matt's head. He rang our home, abusing our children and abusing Matt, saying that he had no right to be a father. And very quickly, Matt became incredibly hypervigilant about the safety of our children. We live in a small country town. They were no longer allowed to walk home from school. We had to change all of the practices around their safety and their security because this man was incredibly volatile and incredibly unpredictable. And he had implied to us very clearly that he had some serious intent and saw, yeah, towards Matt. And he was then allowed to resign from Fire Rescue New South Wales. And so then it was no longer Fire Rescue New South Wales's problem, it was very much ours. And so that was very hard living in a small country town. And that really was the straw that broke Matt. I was unaware in this time, and it's also something that I've now learnt. I worked in social welfare and social services my whole career, and I thought I knew the mental health care system, and I thought I knew the signs. And as I said, I'd asked Matt to leave the force because I thought that he needed a break and it was no longer serving him. And I did not see how he hid his slow unwinding and the impacts of the corrosion that was becoming his mental health. And he hid it in utter perfection and brilliance. So he did a master's. He got a promotion. He was the fittest he'd been in many years. He was riding 40K cycle trips a week. We were running nearly every day. He was, really, really available to friends and family. He was just, living his best life from the outside. And he hid what was happening beautifully from all of us. I think, yeah, it came at quite a sudden shock to me. And it came from Matt, and this had been happening over a 2-year period. So it had been 2 years from this major event within the Fire Rescue New South Wales to one evening we were just sitting outside. We were cooking dinner and we'd just taken a break. Everything was just sort of simmering away, and we went out onto our deck outside our bedroom, and we're just having a gin and tonic in the afternoon. And Matt just turned to me, and I just got this sudden dread, this sense of sudden dread came over me. The look on his face, I just thought, this is not okay. And sorry, in the background to this, as much as I'm saying Matt lived his best life, in the 2 years before Matt's breakdown, he'd been tested for leukemia, pancreatic cancer, and a brain tumour. All of these, obviously now we understand, were his psychological distress presenting in physical symptoms. So we'd managed all of that, but yeah, this look, and I was expecting him to say, actually, I've got some negative results. And at one point, I remember saying to him, I do remember saying at one point, I think it was around the brain tumour, and it's quite banally, I suppose, in a breakfast conversation, said, do you think some of this stuff could actually be mental health? Do you think you should maybe go and speak to someone? And he very quickly said, no, I need it to be cancer. And it didn't hit me like it should have. We did have some conversations about it, and I went, well, hang on, the mental health piece, I think we can do something a bit, about if we get early. Cancer really scares me. I think we're really limited in potentially our options there. And he went on and sort of talked me around, and maybe I let myself be talked around, because in every other aspect of his life, he was doing really well, and I just didn't see anything else. So I just sort of thought this might just be a legacy of his service and first responder service in not wanting to acknowledge or be comfortable around conversations around mental health. And I really probably placed it there. This is a cultural thing for Matt. This isn't actually maybe something that's a problem for our family. This is a cultural context. I'm far more open to talk about mental health because that's my world. So I probably just sense checked myself there and went, okay, this is a cultural thing. And I won't go so hard and be direct in my questioning. It's maybe about having some more subtle conversations later. I did not see it as an alarm bell that I should have. So, yeah, we were sitting out on the veranda, and Matt just, turned to me, and as I said, I was expecting a cancer diagnosis or something to that effect. And no, Matt just turned to me and he said, I don't want to die, but I can't stop myself from taking my own life. And this will be the last dinner I have with you tonight. And I just, sorry, it's so long ago, but yeah, it's every day. And yeah, and I just said to him, hang on, we aren't, what are you saying? And he just said, I've been living with this for so long and I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to die, but I can't live any longer. And the only way I can stop this is if I'm no longer here, and I don't want to pollute you and the girls. I don't want my problems to be your problems. I don't think I'm the father or the husband that any of you deserve or need. And I can't be with what I'm feeling inside and what is in my head every day. And I can't stop this anymore and I can't live with it any longer. And so I immediately did the right wrap around. Hang on. I get that this is a path, but there are other paths. So now that you've told me this is a team, so that was your solution, but maybe I can come up with others. Like, can you give me some time to think of some other solutions? And so I made him promise that he'd give me some time to find some other solutions. And so he committed to that. He gave me a fortnight. And so I was like, right, okay, every second of this fortnight is so precious. And of course, trying to get anywhere in the mental health system in a fortnight means that you are nowhere at the end of that fortnight.
100%.
So that was a battle and a challenge. So it was ringing good GPs that would understand, and we couldn't get into the GP that we wanted because that GP owned the practice but no longer practicing. So we went to another GP who I spent a lot of time really unhappy with and really angry with, and I've reconciled that. But yeah, they put in a mental health care plan, but and referred him to a psychologist that really wasn't a specialty in any of this at all. And Matt had no interest in going to that person. But also within the conversations, there had been a statement said to Matt, and this is Matt's interpretation of it, so I'm not going to make this doctor own it, but Matt left with the sense that all coppers get like this at a certain period of time. It's probably a midlife crisis. Get back to work and stay busy. So he came home and said, there's actually nothing wrong with me. This is, I've just been told by the GP that this is pretty normal for police officers. So I'm normal and this is normal. And if I just stay busy, this will end. And I was like, you can't busy yourself out of this. You've been really busy. You've been running every day, riding 40 Ks on your bike every weekend, doing a master's, getting a promotion. Like, how busy do you think you need to be for that to be the solution to this? You can't busy yourself out of this. You actually can't go to work. You actually need to stop. So it took me a long time to convince him to even put in a leave form. So he put in a leave form. I then rang the receptionist of the GP that I wanted him to see every day. And I apologised publicly to that beautiful woman. There's probably a few apologies that'll come in this conversation, but one of them first is to the receptionist. And I rang her every day and begged and begged and begged. And I finally got an email address that she finally relinquished to me. And I emailed the GP and I said, I'm keeping him alive at the moment. I can't do it on my own forever. I believe that he will respect what you say. He's always thought highly of you. I want him to see you and for you to help us. And that GP came back to work 3 days a week for a year. And he saw Matt straight away. And he'd said all the right things to Matt in that, I see this. This is going to hurt and this is painful and I see you and we will help you. But you actually need to acknowledge this for what it is. And there are people around you that will help, but you actually have to be part of it. And your part of it is acknowledging and accepting. And he was that honest but respectful brutality that actually has to come in that conversation. And Matt really respected it. So Matt did take the leave. He went to the GP. I think he was seeing the GP at least twice a week, if not 3 times a week. And then it was finding a psychologist. So I rang around all my networks to try and find a psychologist that people said was good, because I really felt I didn't have many shots of seeing the wrong person for Matt to actually withdraw from that. So I really needed to do the groundwork. So I had a couple of people recommended to me. And of course, they were so good that their books were full. They weren't taking anyone on. So again, another apology to the two receptionists of the psychologist that Matt first ended up seeing, and she actually practiced over 2 clinics. And I rang those receptionists daily, begging and crying for an appointment. And at the end of the second week, one of the receptionists really, I could hear her heart in her throat, and she said, "You're going to ring me on Monday, aren't you?" Yeah, I'm ringing on Monday and begging again. And she said, "I'll get you the next cancellation appointment." And so Matt got the next cancellation appointment and went and saw this beautiful soul, Paula, who I had a grief process when after a year, Paula said that she'd done all she could with Matt and that it was time to move on. Matt was fine with it. He had this plan, and Matt came home and said, "Oh, Paula said that," and I literally went through a grief process. I'd never met her. I've spoken to her several times on the phone, but I had such a an appreciation is not a deep appreciation, an absolute real love for this woman who had held Matt in a way and helped him through things that I couldn't. And she really was such a huge part of our family's healing and family recovery that I went, "Oh, hang on, you're not going to, like, Paul is not part of the care team anymore. Hang on, I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. Did anyone check with me? I might need to be part of this exit process," which really struck me. I hadn't sort of realized that I'd needed what she was giving Matt as much as I had until there was a conversation about someone else taking that role. So that was a surprise to me. But yeah, so Matt saw Paula then for, yeah, sometimes 2 times, 3 times a week for a very, very long time. And then he also got a psychiatrist. But what really alarmed me in that sort of months, once we got that care team together, was that they all actually had said to me, "This is evidently workers' compensation, but Matt's not well enough to make a claim. So if you can, we get that you need to make the claim because this care is really, really expensive. But if you have a way of covering that yourself, that's our recommendation, because Matt is not strong enough to confront the adversarial nature of workers' compensation, and we may not be able to keep him alive through that initial process. So can you give us a couple of months to get him stronger?" So this was all in the February and March, and we made a claim in, I think, June, July of that year. And subsequently, his entire mental health and well-being went straight back to possibly even worse than what it was when he initially spoke to me that night. So I am very grateful for that advice, but I think I was not ready for that advice. I thought the workers' compensation was the process of getting Matt the care and the coverage and the support and the systems that we needed to get him well and get him back to work. And that was always our plan: take 12 months leave without pay, or sick leave rather, from your substantive job with the government. And we'd go through this process and get you well. And then you'd return to work in some capacity, and we'd build that capacity and you'd return to work. And that's not been, Matt's 3 years in and unemployable and been medically retired from all of his jobs. So it was not our experience. What I thought was the experience and the intent of workers' compensation has certainly not been what we have been given. And unfortunately, we've subsequently found out that that's actually the experience of an awful lot of people. So hence some of our advocacy. But yeah, we finally made that claim. And yeah, that was a whole nother journey and a whole nother story that's probably a completely separate podcast, because that was something in itself.
Yeah, we could talk about the workers' compensation and how that affects everyone for hours, I think.
We can.
And I get where you're coming from with that 100%. So how are you during this time? I know that you were saying Matt was keeping busy to, overcome his PTSD symptoms. I did the same thing. I avoided what was going on by being busy all the
Mm,
time, which was easy because at the time my husband was away for training and I had 3 kids and I
yeah.
was busy anyway. So, and I just avoided everything. How are you though? Because going through all of that and getting Matt these appointments and like hounding staff, and I can't even imagine how that would have been for you trying to keep your husband alive at that
It,
time, and the effect that it had on you and the girls.
it was terrifying every day.
Yeah.
It was a sense of fear and dread leaving the house, the work you'd have to do to leave the house, so that there would possibly be no triggers whatsoever. And I know that just on that busy bit, Matt was really busy prior, but the moment he told me and the moment he was in care, I think that the reality and the severity of it really hit him. And it was interesting. He would sleep at for hours and hours and hours during the day, and then at night, he would go to bed really early, fatigued, but just that horrific, traumatized sleep. I remember saying to my mum one time, I'm so scared to go to bed because it's so terrifying trying to sleep next to Matt. The fits and fear that you could and turmoil and anguish you could see him in and feel him in as he thrashed and fought against whatever was coming at him. Um, and, he'd lash out and you'd be hit and he'd sound asleep. He had no idea. It was literally protecting himself and kicking and running. But I didn't want to remove myself from our bed because I wanted to, that's our bed. I wanted to protect him. But I also didn't want to say to him, you're so scary to me
Yeah.
that I actually can't sleep next to you, because I didn't want more guilt and more shame and more anguish and more pain on him. He took everything as his fault. The self-blame was an aspect of this that I did not understand or comprehend at the beginning, and it's still something we live with daily. Um, so I didn't want to be another reason for him to blame himself for something else wrong in our lives or some other thing that we had to carry. So that was really, really difficult. But yeah, he would sleep through the day, and we've got a sunroom, and he would often be curled up in a chair in the corner of this sunroom with the sun beating down on him. And I remember sort of watching him one day, and I thought, oh, it's like he's nearly hoping that the sunlight will purify him. Like he was bathing in this sun, trying, and I sort of thought he sleeps better bathed in sunlight than he does at night. And maybe the lightness was just enough to make the shadows go away so he could get some rest. Um, but yeah, that was he was so tired and so fatigued and just sleeping, as I said, all the time. And then one of the doctors actually explained that's part of the brain healing, and the brain needs that extensive sleep and deep sleep to heal. And that made a lot of sense to me then. But yeah, so it was, we still had two young girls that were in primary school and early high school. So getting them to school, explaining this whole process to them, it was we've been really open with them, and I know that's not a choice that everyone takes, but it was the choice that we made based on our children and our experience. And so I told the girls very quickly, and I'd used the language. I said, I believe that Dad has a mental health injury from work. I think he will be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression and anxiety, and explained those terms and what that meant in a way that they understood, so that they had the foundation of truth for them to start to understand their world. I let them ask any questions they wanted, and I gave them permission to feel anything that they felt about it. Anger is obviously one of the first things that comes. Guilt for them was also a huge part of it. Um, just fear that they would become their father, that they would live with this, that this would be something that would plague them, that no one would understand. That shame is real. Making up stories about what their father now did because he didn't work. They were too scared to tell their friends in case their friends' parents thought their dad was crazy and wouldn't let them come for, an afternoon playing in the backyard, or their friends wouldn't want to be friends with them because they were now suddenly inflicted with this invisible plague. So that was really, really challenging to help them through. But of course, they also they didn't want to layer this on their dad. So they, around him, tried to become these vivacious, beautiful, angelic children around him so that they could show him that part of his world was beautiful, and that they still loved him. And so, I very quickly saw them move from these bright, bubbly, energetic, beautiful kids into carers. They absolutely constructed their entire world very quickly around their dad's needs. And nearly 4 years on now, the conversations we sometimes have now is resentment. Like, how on earth did so much of my childhood and my early adolescence, and now one of them's 17, this has been most of her adolescence. Um, and the youngest is about to turn 15. It's so much of her life. It's her right from primary school right through to where she is today, and it's still a constant daily presence. And their lives are absolutely planned around their dad. That what kind of day did he have yesterday? He probably would have had an okay sleep. He'll probably be relatively regulated this morning. I can come out and have breakfast while he's still in the kitchen. Or he had a really shitty afternoon. He probably didn't sleep well. I'll wait till I hear no sounds in the kitchen before I leave my bedroom. So their day starts regulating themselves around what their sense of their father is. And this is him getting better. This is him 3 years on and much better than where he was. So, will I have my music loud? Will I sing along to this music that's in my headset? Will that be a trigger? Will dad not like the lyrics? Will that be too loud? All of these sorts of things. I've noticed that they would come home after school and sit in the car for an hour. And they'd say, "Oh, we're just listening to music, or I'm just talking to a friend." No, actually, it was them decompressing and preparing for what home was going to be. So they were suddenly in this world of being scared to be at school because they weren't sure how their dad was doing, and they felt great responsibility for his well-being and him being alive. So they were really worried that maybe he was harming himself, maybe he was taking his life, maybe it had all become too much, maybe that psych appointment was too triggering and he needed them to ground him. They had great responsibility over that. So they were really uneasy and unsure and fearful all day at school. They felt disconnected to their network and their friends. They felt different, even though outwardly they looked no different. But yet, then they were starting to get left out of things because they were withdrawing because they felt so unstable and didn't have a strong sense of self anymore, and their foundation had been shattered. And so then they were starting to be bullied at school or left out, and they didn't know how to make those connections anymore. And then they didn't want to because they were so fatigued with everything being hard in their lives that this is just another thing that's going to be hard and going to hurt. I'll just leave it there and go and have my lunch in the bathroom. So we had a lot of those sorts of things happening. And then home would be fearful. They were on, that typical saying that everyone says, on eggshells. And I've also sort of started to think that it really felt like I was standing in the middle of a minefield. And I knew where I stepped, a mine was going to explode, but I had to make the assessment of what fallout I was prepared to live with. I had to move forward. I couldn't stand here. So I just had to work out whose shrapnel, who got hit by the shrapnel? Who was I prepared to? Was it me? Was it Matt? Was it one of the girls? Was the fallout going to be small enough that I could band-aid them later? All of that sort of stuff. It wasn't just eggshells. There were wherever you stepped, it was going to explode. And I just had to work out what we could live with that in that moment as to where to step and what to say and how to move. And that is exhausting and terrifying, and I felt so guilty that I was making these assessments of acceptable harm. That's how I lived my life. Like, what harm on the people I love most am I prepared to take and accept today to get this life to move forward or for this action to happen? They're disgusting, horrific, and unacceptable decisions that we are forced to make when we are living alongside PTSD and caring for the people that we love. And I was making those assessments for the three people that were most dear to me. I know one night Matt had an utter explosion over, and he was never, I do a lot of talk with him about boundaries and with the girls, but Matt was never violent towards us ever. He was never aggressive towards us. His anger was always at himself. But of course it would explode and he would smack the table or he would throw his phone. Like, I think we've gone through 5 or 6 mobile phones. Just thank God for Apple care plan. But yeah, he would do that. But that was terrifying for the girls and terrifying for me. But then his solution was, I'll remove myself. I'm the problem. I'll remove myself. So he would dramatically leave the house. And the girls are terrified he was harming himself. And they're like, Mum, where is it? We've got to go. Like, you can't follow him. That's one of his triggers. Like, just, so I would then, or if he hadn't left and he was just exploding, the girls are terrified. Matt is in this world of explosion and pain and anger and fear and everything else. And he's not who he is right now. If he could see himself, he would never be doing, like, he would never be acting this way. He's so completely out of control and out of touch with who he is. Um, so who do I hold? Like, where do I go? Like, I'm one person and there are three people that need me right now, that are in the worst moment of their lives, consumed by fear. And I've got to make a choice. And yeah, so this one night in particular, Matt took off, and I just said to the girls, "It's going to be okay. I will get him back. I need you both to stay in the house. Just put on some music, stay together, and I promise you, Dad and I will be back soon." And they were just crying at me and screaming at me and literally dragging on me. I said, "I need you to do this." So I went out, and I had this sense that Matt would harm himself, and it's one of the only times I really had that true sense that this could be it. So I followed him into the paddock, and I found him hiding, and I couldn't get too close, but he let me get close enough, and he then just started, "Go back to the girls. I can make this right." And I'm just like, "You can't make this right." And we were having that kind of conversation, debate. And this went on for a while, and I was getting quite frustrated with Matt because I could not cut in, and it was getting dark, and it was the middle of winter. Anyway, Lillian, our eldest, walked up. I just suddenly heard her coming up from behind me, and she just goes, Mum, Georgie and I can't do this anymore. Like, please come back to the house. We are so scared." I said, "Yeah, honey, I'm coming. Just go back to the house. You and Georgie be together. I promise Dad and I are coming. It won't be long." And Matt just saw this as his opportunity, and he just twisted everything with Lillian against me. "Go to the girls. They need you. You're the best mum. I know you can get them through this. Go to the girls. Listen to Lil. She needs you." And I'm like, "Don't you manipulate her against me so I leave. I'm not leaving. I'm not going down into the house without you." And Lil just kept going, and she's crying, and Matt's just at me. And I needed Lil to go back to the house. I could not cut through with her there. And I just turned to her and I said, "Go back to the house, Lil. Go now." She goes, "Okay, okay, okay, okay. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this." And she started to walk, and her legs fell out from underneath her. And she just collapsed on the ground. And she goes, "Mum, I'm so scared. I can't even move my legs anymore." And Matt just went, "Go to her. Go to her. Lil needs you." And I said, "I'm not leaving now. I'm staying with you." And I just turned to Lil and I shouted at her and I said, "Get up and go to the house." And she goes, "Okay." And she stood up and she went to the house. And I'm standing there going, how in my child's worst moment, I haven't held her, I haven't taken away her pain. I've shouted at her to go to the house so that I can stand here with her father and keep him alive and get him out of the paddock and get him back into our home so I can care for him. And finally, I turned to Matt and I said, "Just get up. I'm done. I am so done. Like, get the fuck up. We're going." And he's like, "Oh," and I said, "That's it." And I grabbed him and he's sort of, trying to pull away. And I just said, "We're doing this. I'm done." And so we walked back into the house, and I got him in the shower and got him to bed, and then I went to the girls, and we just sat and cried for a very long time, and we just talked through it. And the girls were really angry with Dad for making them feel so scared, but they were really sad for Dad and really confused. And, are we enough? Why aren't we enough? Why, how can he be this sad when he loves us this much? And we did all of those conversations that you do so often. And I finally got them calm enough so that I thought that they could rest. And they bunked in together that night, and got some sort of rest. I won't say they got a restful sleep, but yeah. And I talked to both the girls not that long ago about that, and I spoke to a friend of mine also about it. And I kind of went, I hope in time, and I don't expect the girls to have this understanding now, but I hope in time that they know whenever I chose Matt, I wasn't choosing him over them. I was choosing him for them. I was actually choosing them in those moments when I actually had to go to him, because keeping him alive and keeping him well and keeping him with us was what they needed.
Yeah.
And as much as they needed me to hold them and hug them and make their worlds feel safer, I could only do that by keeping their dad with us and calming him down and grounding him and looking after him. And I often, in those times, I'd get really angry and go, I don't know how the agencies that employed him and used all of the best of him, and then the workers' compensation that's supposed to care for him. I am so angry with everyone involved in that entire scheme and employment base to have left me standing here having to make this choice and then reconcile it with myself and my children in time. And provide me virtually nothing and provide my children virtually nothing and don't provide Matt and I family relationship counselling so we can work our way through this so this doesn't become the grudge that breaks us. The amount of acceptance that I've had to work on, to accept, and I use that term, I don't accept where we are in the sense that I'm okay with it. I accept where we are and what's happened because that is the reality and the truth of our experience. And if I don't accept where we are and where we've come from, I can't control and take steps from here to where we want to be. So, but that's so much work. That is exhausting work, and it's good work. It's healing work, but it's hard. And I kind of think, gosh, the amount of acceptance that I've had to work on in so many facets of our lives over the last couple of years is just immense. It's so huge and it's still coming. Like we are still accepting where we are today. We're still accepting things within the workers' compensation system and Matt's claim. We're still finding acceptance in the impact this has. It's a daily practice of accepting the situations and the experiences we're living in and with. And it's rewarding. It gives us a foundation that we can move from with purpose. And we're really focused on the future and hope and moving with purpose for ourselves and for the community that we now see that we serve. And we are really, really hopeful. I don't want people to think that we're not hopeful and our family's not full of love. It is. It's a joyous family. It's a loving family, and it is a family full of hope. But it's also a family that just has this extraordinary background and undercurrent within our daily experiences.
Wow. So I've had to compose myself, Sarah. That's so emotional. And thank you for sharing that, because I know that it's something that a lot of people and a lot of families will really resonate with, keeping their loved ones with us.
Yeah, I also want to say though to the first responders that might be listening to this, we talk about our experiences as family members and those that love you to try and give each other the support and the strength that we need. Nothing of what we say we mean to hurt you, and I think that's really hard for us. So much of our experience is wound up in your injury, but it's our injury too. And it does have a legacy and an impact on us. But we don't say that to hurt you. We say that so that we can care for you and help you, because it's that acceptance piece. We have to accept how this sits with all of us so that we can be purposeful to get you better and to love you and to help you. And I know that often, I know when Matt was doing the Heart to Heart walk last year and I started just posting some things about living alongside PTSD, and one of the walkers actually said to Matt one morning, God, have you read what Sarah wrote last night? Like, Jesus, mate, are you okay with her putting that out there? Like, shit, that hit home. And I'm really fortunate. Matt literally just said to him, I don't read it. I don't want it. I know Sarah doesn't write it to hurt me. I'm talking about my experience because it helps me and it brings attention and light to what we need. I can't deny Sarah and Lillian and Georgina's story and voice and experience for them to advocate, for them to get the support and the care that they need. And I've been really, really fortunate that Matt has always had that approach. And I know that it's not something that every first responder or everyone living with a mental health injury can find at all the time. And I'm sure there's sometimes that Matt would just go, my God, could you just stop? Like, shut up. Really? I'm sure there are times that he feels like that, but I've been really, really fortunate that he has come to that understanding and perspective of this, because it has been incredibly strengthening for the girls and I to be able to have a voice and share our experience. And we don't see our experience very often. Our experience is that of protection and love for the person that we hold most dear. And sometimes we don't feel like we have permission to talk about our experience, because we've only got our experience because of their experience. And
Yeah.
so they're so intertwined. There's no blame there. That is just it. That's just the reality. But these things are so complex that blame is very, very real. And it is often one of the first responses and the first ways that people take these conversations, but they're never meant that way. So they are hard to talk about, but I genuinely know that they are hard to hear. And I apologize to anyone that's listening to this that goes, that's really tough to hear. And I don't want that to be maybe the reality for my family. But unfortunately, it is a reality for a lot of families. And while my experience is my experience and it might resonate with others, mine is not everybody's experience either. So I think that's also really, really important to say, that I'm not speaking for any other wife or partner or family member. I'm speaking to them from my experience.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't hear a lot of people, like you say, talking about their experiences because of that fear that you'll either trigger your partner or harm them further. And so I really do thank you, because it's not spoken about enough, and you can't help but put yourself in Matt's position. But also,
Yeah,
as a wife myself, putting myself in your position and thinking about that, like I can't even imagine that situation. But something I do want to talk to you about now
yeah.
is the workers' compensation system. And I know that you are a very strong voice for change, and living alongside PTSD is created out of that.
Mm.
And I would love for you to talk to us about what you're doing with living alongside PTSD, because it's so important.
Yeah, thank you. Look, it really struck me very quickly that I was not included in anything. And it was only by Matt's choice that I was. And again, this is another element that I know we are very fortunate. And this is Matt's approach to it. Matt, very early on, he didn't want to see the psychologist and he didn't want to see the psychiatrist and he didn't want to do those things. And he came to me and said, the choices I've been making for myself have ended up being that I'm going to take my life. So I am clearly not in the best place to make decisions for myself right now. So I'm going to let you make some of those decisions. And if those decisions are that I need to see a GP and I need to go to the psychologist and I need to engage with a psychiatrist and I need to take medication, which I've never wanted to take, I will do those things, because I clearly am not acting in my own best interests. So that was a incredibly profound position for him to take on this, I think. And that then, when we entered the workers' compensation system, I could just see the brutality of it. Matt was not psychologically or emotionally or cognitively in a place to speak to anyone in this system about his own best interests. He did not represent himself in his own best interests. He could get angry very quickly out of quite a benign, well, they would assume a benign comment, but I would say that it's because they're not trauma informed or
Mm.
person centered. Um, so they're just ticking a box and doing a piece of paper. So that was really damaging to him. And I could see his treatment unwinding the more contact he had with the system, the frustration he would have at trying to express himself or navigate or understand. So I was walking alongside this and I said to him, I need to be part of these conversations just to help you listen and hear so I can take notes, because you forget the beginning of the conversation after the second word in the conversation. So you're not even like, you'd get off the phone and I'd say, okay, so what's happening? You're like, oh,
Mhm.
oh, um, oh, I think they'll send us an email. I'm like, oh, you think? Will they? Or will that email reflect what you said in that conversation? Or will that email reflect what they are prepared to give us? Or like, is
Yeah.
okay, can we start again? And I didn't want to be doing that to him either, because then he's like, well, I can do this. And I'm like, "No, you can. But this is a system that is so complex." So he very quickly gave permission to everyone in writing and on the phone for me to actually be the lead contact. So it was my phone that they would ring.
Yeah.
not Matt's, because the phone calls you don't control. Matt might have been having a really good day, and then they'd make one phone call and it could be quite benign, but they cut in on our life and they don't have permission to do that. And I could see the girls getting angry. Matt would finally have a pretty stable day or morning, and we'd get a phone call and it would completely unwind the rest of our day. And the girls would get to the end of the day and go, how do they have the right to take what would have been our best day yet from us because they bloody wanted a phone number or a pay slip or something stupid that doesn't matter. And they took our best day. And now it's this. And now we've got dad angry tonight. And now he can't sleep. And why now tomorrow will be shit too. Like, and I went, okay, we've got to actually manage this. You can't cut into our life unbeknownst to us at your random need for information. If this is person centered, then put the person at the center of this. So we can't do that without lots of structural change. So I'm advocating for that. But what I could do in my family was become the lead contact. So that's what happened. And that was really, really beneficial. It is a full-time job.
Yeah.
Which, so I remember saying very early on, and this is something I want to do with living alongside. And it's something that if there's anyone out there listening and knows how to start to help me move this forward, please. But one of the things that I said to one of the poor women on the other end of the phone in EML or eye care at one point, I said, I need a breast care nurse. I'm sure she thought I was mad. She goes, I beg your pardon, Sarah. I said, I need a breast care nurse. She's like, sorry, have you got, I went, no, I don't have breast cancer. But the McGrath Foundation raised money for breast care nurses. And when you get a diagnosis, you get allocated a breast care nurse that knows the system, that knows the treatments, that knows the injury, that knows the disease, that knows the impact. And they walk with you through your diagnosis and all of your treatment. And they are your family's person to go to appointments, to triage information, to look at all of the information and say, hey, we've got some options here. Or check in with, they care for you through your breast care journey. I said, I want someone that connects with my family and cares for my family through this system because this is brutal. I described it one day as like knowing that you're lining up for a haunted house and you've actually bought your own ticket to your own trauma, which you're really not really sure why you're doing as you line up. You're kind of really going, oh, God, should I really talk my friend into letting me purchase this ticket? Anyway, we're here now. Okay, well, we have no choice. You've got to move forward. And you walk into the door and you're blindfolded and you're in the dark and you don't have any way to get out of the exit. You don't have a map. You know that at some point something's going to hit you. You don't know when or from where or from what side. And you just have to grab hold of your children and your loved one and find the exit. Being hit unbeknownst all the time. And this poor woman goes, oh, Sarah, that's a horrible way to describe our system. I said, oh, that is not a horrible way to describe the reality of my everyday. You might get a paycheck and go home and live at work in a nice office and have, wireless USB chargers on your lunch station desks outside in the public park outside iCare, but I don't get that. I actually have this terrifying system and I don't know how to get out alive. And so it was a full-time job navigating this. So I wanted a breast care nurse to walk with me and help me navigate and shelter me and my family through this process. So maybe not breast care nurses, but maybe some workers' compensation, family support people that can help and have a lens, not just to the injured person, but to everyone. I mean, my dad's 88 and my mum's in her early 80s, and they have sat with this since the diagnosis. And they have been utterly extraordinary. But the trauma is not just generational to the next generation. It actually goes up into the other generations and the whole system and the whole network that supports and loves that person. My dad's played at 2:00 in the morning when Matt's been missing to try and ground my girls and give them something else to think about. My mum has bathed Matt when he has disappeared and come back out of the bush, muddied and bloodied, and put him to bed because I was not at home. They've sat in some of these experiences and I think, gosh, what have I done to their retirement? This is the time that they should be enjoying their grandchildren and enjoying their friends and the hard work that they've put in their whole lives. And now they sit with us in this trauma and help me navigate and try and protect me. And I know that's what parents do. But at 88, and 83. It's a really tall ask of really beautiful people that have already done all of their hard work. And Mum has told me it's not hard work, it's love. And I know that, and anyone that knows my parents will know that instinctively, that is who they are. But it is extraordinary that they're not seen in this system. There's nothing around a support network or a coffee morning for them, like for parents of our first responders, that, that must be absolute. I rang my mother-in-law after Matt rang her to tell her what had happened. And I just rang and said, Helen, I love you. Ask any questions. I can't imagine that phone call. Just know that I'm loving him, and I'm doing everything I can to keep him with us, but ask anything. And all she could do was cry. And I'm like, where's that support network? Where's that support? We need to be intentional. These things don't happen. They have to be done with intent. So, the girls get, I think, children of and partners of first responders in at least the EML and eye care system within New South Wales get 8 psychoeducation sessions, they're called. I couldn't find anyone that knew what a psychoeducation session for PTSD was in the Hunter. Of one person I've been told about, but their books are full, so I've never been able to get into them. I found my own psychologist myself, but you get 8 sessions. I remember the psychologist that I found for Lillian, who has just been a godsend, and it's taken me much longer to find someone for Georgie, which is also a huge issue. My youngest went for an incredibly long time without proper psychological care because we could not get her to anyone that she felt comfortable with or that could sustain what she needed. And, we have to pay for that past those 8 sessions. But I remember Lil went to her 8 sessions, and at the end of the 8th session, just at the end, last 15 minutes, she finally actually had the ability to put some words to, and she calls it's in her top 5 worst moments, and that was the moment that I spoke about earlier. It's in the top 5. It's not the top, but it's in the top 5, she tells me. And she finally found some language around that to very roughly, like, just sort of start to talk to it and express a little bit. And the psychologist did not understand the experience or really where Lil was going with it. And the session was over. And the psychologist actually rang me and said, Sarah, I don't know how you do this, but you can't leave this here. I'm not disclosing, but I'm telling you, it would have been psychologically more sound for Lillian not to say anything to me than for her to find the language at the end of her care to just find some words to it. I don't know it doesn't have to be with me. I don't know how you do this. I don't know what your finances are. But you can't, I'm telling you, you psychologically, medically, clinically cannot leave this here. So then you go, okay, how do we afford this when Matt's not working? We haven't got an accepted claim. Matt's claim wasn't accepted for 8 months, which was, we've GIP'd everything, and I encourage everyone to GIP everything. But we GIP'd his file, and it's taken us multiple GIPers. We've had to put in freedom information to CIRA, to iCare, to the IRO, to the police, to the fire brigade, to EML. Transparency of government does not exist in the iCare workers' compensation system. But within all of that, and that's a full-time job in itself, trying to actually work out the language and the fine-tuning of such a request to actually get the information that you need. You would just think that you would write and ask for your file. Well, that's not the way it works. So within all of that, we discovered that the medical advice on day 5 after Matt submitted his claim was that it was a valid claim. They accepted the severity, they accepted the causation. It should be accepted. But because we'd made that claim with the fire brigade because he was in the fire brigade, and they didn't want to take full coverage, even though psychological workplace injuries is a disease injury or PTSD, because it's or it was deemed a progressive injury. And we agreed with that. So it's a disease injury, which falls under the dust disease legislation. So it's good that we deal with psychological injuries in dust law. So that means that the employer of last contribution carries the claim. And the fire brigade felt that the police were also a contributor, so they didn't financially want to carry the claim fully. So they wanted the police, but the police would not come on board. So then they said to us, could you make a claim with the police? So then we made it thinking we were doing the right thing, didn't understand this law at the time. We thought, yep, okay, that's what we need to do. Of course, yeah, they were both contributors. Yep, we get that. That was not what we should have done. So we made a claim with the police and they rejected outright. because they weren't the employer of last contribution. So there was a legal definition and the legal, like legally, morally, they should have, I believe, because absolutely they should be involved. But legally, there's no morals in this system. So it's only legal. And legally, they could get away without doing anything. So legally, they didn't have to. What that said to Matt, and you and I met at the First Responder Mental Health Conference earlier this year, and that moral injury conversation that just, I think, hit all of us heavily. Here's the moral injury. Matt served and protected New South Wales for 18 years in the New South Wales Police Force. Within police rescue, he's highly decorated. He's got many awards and bravery medals. So I want to pin something on his chest and to recognise the work that he's done. But when that work hurts, they find a legal loophole that says we don't have to. And, Matt kind of at one point said, there were some jobs that I never wanted to do that were so horrific and, ghastly for many reasons, not just the physical visual trauma. They were emotionally layered with just horrific circumstances. I didn't want to do those jobs because who would want to step into that?
Yeah.
But you always step into that because that is your job. You are skilled and you are trained and you serve and protect. And he said, I could never turn around and go, oh, boss, that job really doesn't sit well with me. And I think it's in my best interests not to do that job. But when you make a claim to your employer that that job hurt you, they've got the capacity to go, it's not in our best interests to accept liability. That is a moral injury. And we need that term to be legally recognised as a medical diagnosis. And the fact that we sit in 2024 with the knowledge that we have, and we have lawmakers still telling us that we have to be careful with Treasury managed funds, so we have to move slowly and methodically. I want you to be careful with Treasury managed funds. I want you to move methodically. I think you are not being careful with Treasury managed funds when you don't accept and make legal these medical diagnoses, because you are actually misappropriating funds in treatment that is not actually focused on the actual diagnosis, because we can't diagnose moral injury because you legally won't recognise it. So we have to give them a diagnosis that actually doesn't fit, which then puts them down a pipeline of treatment that is actually not focused on their core issues. So how do we ever recover well and sustain healing if we are being put down a pipeline that is not fit for purpose? We would be back at work. We would be healthier. We would be doing better. We would be taxpayers. Our families would be healthier. Our children wouldn't have a legacy of being engaged in a mental health care system. My youngest missed 58 days of school last year and 36 partial, all because of her father's injuries. Her education is now being impacted. That's not a good use of Treasury managed funds. So I want you to be really careful and really purposeful with Treasury managed funds. How dare you use that? And you can hear it in my tone. I get so annoyed at politicians and staffers telling me that that is why we need to move slowly and we need to be careful and we can't introduce these sorts of things without really lots more research. I'm like, well, the research is there. The will is not.
Yeah.
So, we've really got to find the will. And I think, unfortunately, the will in the community to support and require our politicians and our local members to take this action. The will is not there in the general voting population until a loved one or themselves enters this system. But this is a system that every single person employed in New South Wales today is potentially going to be a victim of. Because this is the only system, and particularly in the first responder system, where Treasury managed funds, which is EML, QBE and Allianz, that provide the care for all of government employees. So it's not just first responders, it's nurses and it's transport people and it's teachers. We've discovered through the CIRA review that got released a week ago, and the McDougall report that was done a couple of years ago as well, and there's case law now, unfortunately, as well, that supports this, that says that Treasury managed fund insurers are not legally required to operate and legislatively legally required to operate under the iCare system. So they are contractually required to do so under their contract with iCare. But if they breach, CIRA cannot bring penalties or prosecution against them because they are actually outside their scope. which is just extraordinary to think that government employees, unlike every other employee in New South Wales, is not given the same legislative legal protections of the system of care that they are given after their service to the state has hurt them. It's quite profound that this has been allowed to go on silently in the background for many, many years. And what that has now done to Matt has been he's had 9 breaches, and I'm sure there's many listening that have had many, many more, but we've identified, and this is the other thing, we've identified all the breaches in Matt's claim ourselves.
Yeah.
IRO, iCare, and CIRA have not identified one of them. Every time we identify them, they write us a letter saying, thank you for the opportunity for us to improve our practice. We've now written to them and reminded them of their obligations under the contract. And we were getting really annoyed that that was all that was happening. We're like, hang on, IRO, hang on, CIRA, hang on, iCare. You know, the legislation says you can do these things. Why is none of this done when these people breach? What we have now discovered that they all knew and have gaslit us this whole time is that the reason why that's all that they do is because that's all that they can do, because EML, Allianz, and QBE under TMF sit outside the parameters of legislative framework and protection. So so Matt has now said they've breached 9 times, nothing has happened, no one prevents them from doing this, and when they do it, they get a letter. If I ever did anything like that in any of my careers serving this state, I would have been prosecuted myself or had serious charges or ramifications or career-ending outcomes. I'm not subjecting myself any longer to a system that does not afford me the legislative protections that are apparently there within the system. So he's withdrawing from treatment. He's not allowing himself to be subjected to that. And so that's now something that me and the girls have to manage, is that he's been doing well. He responds really well to treatment. We are fortunate. He really opens himself up to treatment, and he does do the work. I've never seen anyone work harder on themselves in my life than what Matt has done in the last 3 years. It has been utterly humbling to watch how hard he works and how he forces himself into situations that he knows will hurt him and be hard, but he does it for his children, to be a present father, to be a present husband, to maintain some normalcy, to reflect what a functioning human should be. And, on that, we then your Facebook page gets scrolled, and, Lee Kelly and Associates, on behalf of EML lawyers, rip that photo off the Facebook page and say, oh, Matt's nicely dressed, so he's got capacity for self-care, and he's standing there with his children, so he's maintaining a healthy family, and Sarah's standing next to him, so he maintains a marriage, and oh, look, he's smiling, so he doesn't have a problem being in crowds. And you go, what? That's not our experience.
Yeah.
Matt was unwell all morning. We dressed him. I picked his clothes. The girls are standing next to him to ground him. We've got a joke in the family that when Matt needs to smile, we tell him to bite a pencil. So one of the girls had whispered that to him just before the photo was taken. So, you manipulate our life against us while denying our reality. And then you want to abuse and misrepresent any capacity that you see against us to say that that is evidence of this injury not having a legacy or a huge, detriment to the capacity that you hold as a human. You can't possibly ethically manage a system to get people back to work when that's the basis of the approach. So we are really focused on presumptive legislation. New South Wales is the only state or territory in Australia now that doesn't have presumptive legislation for first responders with a psychological workplace injury. I cannot fathom how the biggest employer of first responders in Australia does not have presumptive legislation. So we really need to advocate for that. We are really trying to look at, within living alongside, I'm really trying to advocate for better support for families. So I think that there should be unlimited psychological support and care for parents and partners and children of first responders, and that should be directed by their psychologist and their GP, so that we can actually sustain their care and their well-being. Trying to actually support my children's schools to have any understanding of what my children were now living with was impossible. They have no supports within the education system to get any information about first responder families, the impact of shift work, the impact of night shifts, the impact of, the Bondi event, for example, children there knowing their parents are ambulance officers and police officers, scared that their dads and mums are going to work, and that's what they might be faced with. You know, the bushfires in 2019 and 2020 with children of RFS families watching, you know, not able to leave their classrooms at all during the day because the smoke was so bad, knowing mum and dad are out there and they come home at night and all they see and hear on the news is Australia's burning to the ground. You know, the fear those young children must have sat with while they were so, but how do they speak to that fear when everyone is so proud of what their parents are doing? That is a really hard ask on young children to navigate emotionally and cognitively how they express their needs or their fears in that space. So we need schools to be able to see that for our children and our families and be able to access care and programming and support so that the teachers and those that are in positions of care and responsibility for our children are informed with best practice. The Defence Force do it. Whenever there's a defence, you know, anywhere where there's a defence location and there's schools nearby, those schools have access to great supports.
They do.
We don't have that for our first responders, yet, you know, we've got all sorts of systems in New South Wales for veterans, defence veterans, in discounts in all sorts of, you know, state-based taxes and things. We don't provide that to our own state-based employees. You know, we've got return to work supports. It's a state government requirement every year to actually identify how many defence veterans are employed in public service in New South Wales. We don't have that same data capture. Therefore, it's a goal of the government. We don't have that same goal for our own first responders that we've already trained and employed and hurt, and we don't have that same approach to getting them back into other government employment like we do the defence. And I'm not saying don't do it for the defence. Absolutely do it for the defence, but actually also do it for your own employees, because the defence are federal employees.
Yeah.
What about our first responders that are state-based responsibilities? So there are some systems there that we can improve and change. But in terms of the support specifically for families, I would really like to see the Department of Education come on board and be included in this conversation. I alluded to the heart-to-heart walk earlier. And we joined Matt on the heart-to-heart walk in the last 2 weeks with quite a number of other families, and it sort of became quite a big celebration as we got closer to Canberra, and it was just I've still got goosebumps. It was just incredible. And there was one of the walkers, Billy, another incredibly passionate advocate for this space, and he's in the ACT. And Billy's son, Rowan, joined us on the walk. And so too did Hoppy, who is one of the core four, and his wife, Janine, who walked to represent partners. And Janine and I did the podcast or the episode on Matt's podcast while we were on the walk together. And two of their children also joined in this sort of, and for the last couple of days. And we were in the Brindabellas and we were walking through the Brindabellas into Canberra on the second last day. And the kids woke up that morning and said, "Oh, can we just do a kids walk? Like, can you all adults stay in the cars?" And we're like, "Oh, okay, road traffic management plan. Let's get this sorted." "Yeah, I'm sure we can." So we said, yeah, you can do an hour. So we worked it all out and off they walked. And they just talked and, you know, shylarked and just had a wonderful time. You could just see them walking through the ranges. It was just exquisite to watch as parents. And we pulled up at the end of the hour and said, "Okay." And they all just sort of went, "No, we're not coming off."
Oh,
And, "Oh, sorry." And they didn't want to come off the walk because they wanted to walk for every child of a first responder that lives with this injury and lives with this experience and doesn't feel seen and doesn't feel heard. And they said, we're not going to come off the walk. We are walking, and every step we take is for another child like us out there that doesn't feel seen and doesn't feel heard, because they are by us today. And for our kids to come to that on their own and walk with such compassion and purpose, really, it just brought all of us, we all just sat in the cars and howled. The pride watching our children do this, it was absolutely extraordinary. And Rowan and Georgie, excuse me, they became quite good friends just instantly. It was that instant bond. And I'm sure you would appreciate that, and the listeners would appreciate that when you meet someone that has this a shared living experience. There are no words, there is no need for words. We just understand each other straight away. And I got that with a number of the wives that I met. And yeah, anyway, Georgie and Rowan and Lillian just had that instantly. And we'd walked into Canberra and we'd stayed that last night and ordered way too many pizzas and Anne Urquhart came, and which was just beautiful, a senator from Tasmania that's been incredibly supportive, and Jeremy Fruttell, who's now the Commissioner for Fire Rescue New South Wales, he's deputy or acting at the time, and he came and had the last night pizza with us, and which was extraordinary. And all of our friends and family all came, and Simone Haig from Tasmania, who actually was the person that started the work for the walk, which was Simone actually started the 2019 Senate inquiry into first responder mental health. She was the instigator of that report. So she was there too, which was a beautiful surprise. So we had this gorgeous night. And then we walked in onto Parliament House the next day, and we went and celebrated that night. And the next day we had to go on, back to work, got to clean all the cars. Just got to return clean vehicles. They were just absolutely, it was hilarious. So we all went to clean the cars, and we were getting ready. And Georgie sat on the bed and was crying. And I said, "Oh, honey, you okay?" She goes, "The moment Dad left the driveway, I wanted the walk to be over. I've hated the walk the whole time Dad's been away because I've not known if he's okay. And he's not, hasn't been at home. And it's been hard, and I've missed him. And I've wanted him back, and I've wanted the walk to be over every day. And now I never want the walk to end." And she said, "Because today I've got to say bye to Rowan." And she said to me, "I now get why Janine means so much to you. And I now know why Dad, like the walk guys, mean so much to Dad and his PTSD support group at home. I know why those people mean so much, because they just get it." And she said, "I've never met, other than Lil, my sister, I've never met another kid that just gets my experience without me having to say a word, who accepts me, who understands, who sees all of that fear and ugliness and sees me beyond it." And she said, "I've never had that, and I don't want to lose that." And Rowan's in Canberra, and I'm in the Hunter Valley, and we just, we've made a pact. We make sure that they connect. But I've been reflecting on that a lot in terms of, living alongside and the support and the advocacy for families. It shouldn't be by chance that Matt and Billy did a walk that our children get that kind of connection. This is something, if it's good for our first responders with the injury, it's good for our partners and it's good for our kids. We need clinically managed peer groups. And it's not, I catch up with a friend for a coffee, and she's a PTSD wife as well. But that's our friendship. And yes, we can do peer catch ups, but actually, clinically managed peer groups are a completely different type of therapy. And they're a really powerful, important type of therapy. And we need to be actually providing and creating those and being intentional. These should not be by chance. I met this other wife on Facebook and we both discovered we lived near each other. That should not be how our connections and our support networks by chance are created. Some of them are beautiful. And absolutely, my friendship with her is, and I'd never give it up for a moment. And I'm glad that, and I love the way it came about. But actually, the systems and those responsible for this should be intentional about our care, because I know when I'm doing better, Matt's doing better. When the girls are doing better, Matt's doing better. And I'm sure that that is the same for every family living alongside a psychological workplace injury from first responder service. When we understand, when we accept, when we can find acceptance in our own lives and our experience, when we know what to expect in the system, but when we are fulfilled and nourished and we have our breaks and our support, we can weather what our experiences are with our loved one. We can have more compassion. We can have more understanding. Our reactions can probably be more timely and appropriate rather than coming constantly from fatigue, which then is a trigger and sets them off. And, if we do better, our people do better. And if they do better, they recover more sustainably, and they recover with purpose, and they recover to more of the people that we knew. And then they become more productive and capable. And that's what this system and that's what our society wants. I cannot fathom in 2024, with all that we know, that we've still done so little. And every time I speak, people are like, "Oh, that's interesting." Like, it shouldn't be interesting. It should be normal.
Yeah.
Like, come on. I don't think I'm a genius. I don't think I'm a visionary. I don't think anything amazing of myself. I'm speaking my truth, and I'm not the first person to do this. I know I cannot possibly be the first person to say the things I've said today. There are hundreds and thousands of people across Australia with this living experience screaming for this. We just have to find a way to connect our voices, connect our advocacy, and drive it to the direction that it needs to be driven. So that's what I'm hoping to do with Living Alongside with my friend. And yeah, we're hoping that we can be that voice, that we can. As I said earlier, I've been doing some of those Instagram sort of posts. I kind of went, oh, stuff, and I'm just going to put it out there. And, the feedback from across Australia has been incredible. They're just, they're saying to me, this is the first time I've felt seen. I had a woman contact me. She's in her 40s, and she said, I'm the daughter of a paramedic. And this is the first time I felt like my mum or my experience has ever been acknowledged or seen. How can you get to be in your 40s and never feel like, what you lived with as a child with your dad and the paramedics is only seen now? That is just so heartbreaking to me. And so, that's why we're sharing our story, because we know that we're not alone, but we are alone in this in so many ways. So we kind of start saying we're alone together,
Yeah.
because I think we do feel really alone in our worlds, but we are alone together. And by sharing our stories and sharing our experiences, we can find healing and hope, but we can also find validation. And that was one of the comments that I got recently. You're the validation I didn't even know I needed. And I thought, okay, that's enough. Like I'll just keep doing this. I'll just, and I had a first responder contact me recently, and he said, I've never realized that this impacted my wife till I read what you were saying. So he said, I've not known how to talk to her about that. So what they do now is whenever I make a post, they read it separately, and then they get a glass of wine and they come together and they talk about it collectively. And he said, you've given us ways of talking about this that we probably would never have found before. So yeah, I'll keep sharing while because it means something to me, but if it means something to someone else, and that's even more beautiful. So some of the stuff's raw and hard, like the last one I posted. I don't think Matt should probably not read, but it was about the loss of intimacy in our relationship, through the injury, through the medication, through the fatigue, but also when you care for someone so long and have to remind them to clean their teeth. There's nothing romantic about that. So that kind of gets stolen and lost. And that's a hard thing to talk about as well. And I've been sitting on that one for months, and I've had a catch up with a couple of women in Newcastle, and one of them made some kind of quite flippant conversation, like sort of comment alluding to that. And we started talking about it, and I went, okay, and I said, oh, look, I've got this post. I don't know whether I'm going to put it out there. It's pretty personal and confronting, and make me feel really vulnerable when you're putting those sorts of elements of your life out into the public. And they all went, oh no, it's something we all,
Everyone.
everyone feels it, everyone experiences it in different ways, but we also feel really silenced about that element of the loss. And I think so I put it out there, and that feedback's been amazing. Like, it's just been such a conversation starter, but thank you. I've never felt like I've had permission to say this piece, those sorts of comments, but they are all moments of loss and grief. And I think, we have to have the understanding and the language around some of this. And I don't think you find the right language till you just start talking or journaling or writing. I use voice to text a lot, or video voice messages to myself. And some of it's so messy and crazy. And I listen back and go, wow, wow, you hadn't had your first coffee. But others of it, I go, that's it. That's the articulation I needed about my experience. Language matters, and words are important and powerful. So that's something that I've really been doing a lot of, is just 5 minutes. I just give myself permission to say anything. And then I listen back when I'm ready and find the language that I needed, because it doesn't come just swirling in my head. And you want to express yourself the right way when you're talking to someone else, or when you're trying to seek the support you need. But often you're so overwhelmed and emotional in that moment that you actually can't clearly articulate maybe what the experience is or what the ask is. So I just play around in the background with a lot of that until I think I've landed on it, and I feel like I've got something that really does represent what I want to say and how I'm feeling. And then I put that out there, because so much of this is, shooting from the hip. We've never walked this path before. We are constantly learning. So I really do need to find the language that best reflects and represents this experience for me. So that's been something that's been really, and it's been so cathartic. It's just been so, journaling, everyone always talks about it.
It is.
I have dyslexia, so my journaling can be a little wild. I can sometimes not recognize the words that I've written. So, there's a layer there for me. So I think that's why I've also used voice to text and the video. So, yeah, you find what works for you. And I would encourage everyone just to find what works for them and use that time and use that private time to find that understanding in yourself when you're living it every day and it's constant and it's layered. You actually don't even know how you feel. Like, so many people will ask that and you go, I don't know. I can't find a word for this. It's enormous and it's everything and it's too much and I don't know.
Yeah.
And so refining, but that then feels frustrating and disempowering and scary. So, finding the language and finding the words and finding the articulation has been really helpful for me to work on that acceptance, because you can't accept what you can't articulate. And if you don't have the language around it, yeah, where do you start with
Yeah.
acceptance when you
What
don't
is,
know what you're accepting?
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I usually end our conversations for people that are having a tough day right now.
Yeah.
But I would like to know if you have one piece of advice for a partner or a child of someone that is living alongside PTSD. Have you got something that you can say to them to help them along a little bit?
Oh,
I know you've probably got a
yeah,
lot of things.
there
Have
are a
you
lot
got
of things, but
one?
you're just gonna make me cry because
Yeah,
that's everything, isn't it? That's why we speak.
it is. Yeah.
Um, I suppose that obviously the big thing that we've always felt is that we're so alone and you are not, but you also need to be really honest for you, and you can't deny your experience or your needs because you love that person so immensely and that their needs seem so profoundly important, because often their needs are about them staying alive. That does not negate the importance and the severity of your needs and the needs of your children. So I would really encourage people to really, really accept that that's their experience, acknowledge it and own it and see it as a sense of power. Speak out, ask for help. If it's not to your person that you love, and I totally understand why you couldn't go there, and I don't often go there with Matt, find that other person. And if you don't feel like you've got a safe person in your network, there are those social networks. Reach out to them, go to your GP, start those conversations, but don't deny or make benign your experience because you think your loved ones is more profound or important. It's that old adage of you can't fill someone else's cup till your cup is full. We're all running on empty. So start with you, because when you're well and you're grounded and you're secure and you're informed, you are more purposeful in the care and support that you give to a loved one. So it all starts with us, and we are equally as important as our loved one that's going through that injury.
Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your passion and your passion for change in what is a very, I'm trying to think of the right word, complicated system
Mm.
with so much emotion attached to it. So I really thank you. On behalf of our guests that are listening, that now will feel a little bit more seen. Just like that paramedic's daughter, I really want to thank you for coming on today.
No, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was lovely to meet you at the conference and all the learning that I think we probably did together and separately in that couple of days. But yeah, thank you for the opportunity for our voices to be shared. And thank you for the, I suppose, understanding that when we share our voice, it's not stealing our first responders and it's not adding a layer to them. It's actually a healing path for all of us. So thank you for listening. And I do just send so much love and respect to everyone that's listening. And yeah, alone together, we will get through this. And there are supports out there, and reach out. Yeah, and stay true to you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any new ones. We release fresh content every Tuesday. And while you're there, take a moment to leave us a review. I would genuinely appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Tactical Yoga Australia, and share this episode with your friends, family and workmates to spread inspiration. Your support means the world. My name is Rosie Skeen. Join me again next week for another empowering and positive episode of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Until then, be kind to your mind and trust in the magic of your consistent and positive efforts. Triumph beyond your trauma is closer than you think. Have the best week.